Former Maryland and U.S. Labor Secretary Tom Perez announced his run for governor of Maryland yesterday. Despite recently taking a job at a law firm and lobby shop infamous for helping corporations strong-arm unions and evade labor violations. But according to Perez's announcement video, his moral compass is unfettered.
And that's exactly what I'll do as your governor.
Tom is just probably the person with the clearest moral compass of anyone I've ever had the chance to get to know and to work with.
He really does just care about people and about leaving the world so much better than how he found it.
He's the kind of person we really want as our governor.
This is a guy that we need for governor.
His story reminds us of this country's promise, that if you're willing to work hard, it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what your last name is, you can make it if you try.
Maryland Governor Larry Hogan will be leaving office in 2023 due to term limits. Perez will face off against fellow Obama administration alums in the Democratic Party. Now, council member at large in Montgomery County, Maryland, Will Jawando, and senior policy analyst of the Independent Women's Forum, Inez Stepman, join us now to discuss. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Now, Will, what do you make of the fact that Tom Perez was part of this anti-labor lobbying effort? Do you trust him that he has this unfettered moral compass?
Well, look, I am in the unenviable position of having multiple of my constituents running for governor. Here in Montgomery County, Maryland, you mentioned Tom Perez. Obviously, you've got John King. I've endorsed Wes Moore out of Baltimore. It's just for full transparency. I think we need fresh ideas. But we have a lot of qualified folks. I worked with him in the Obama administration. When I was in the White House, he was at Labor Secretary. And so I know him well. As I said, he's a constituent. He used to serve on the Montgomery County Council. But I think what we need right now is folks who have the right mix of public service, of dedication to community, of lived experience. And that's why I've endorsed Wes. But look, he took that job at Venable recently. I don't know the details of what he's working on. I think it's within the last couple of months. That certainly will be something he'll have to explain to voters about what the decisions he's made and why he's working there and what he's doing. And I think it's a fair question to ask.
Inez, what are your thoughts here? I mean, I remember before he made his announcement for governor, the fact that he took this job at this law firm being big news and was actually questioned about it a few times myself. At a time in the country when we are discussing labor rights and conditions for working people in the United States, his work at a law firm that was potentially union busting, I think certainly won't help him win any labor endorsements in the state. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think Will would know a lot more about that. It is literally his backyard. But I will say that what's more concerning to me about this story and where he's working, rather than the specifics, is how common it is and what they're hiring him to do, right? So they're not hiring him because of his practice expertise. More than likely, they're hiring him because he knows a lot of people at the Department of Labor. And that is the kind of influence trading that happens all the time with both parties in Washington, D.C. I do think that it's a large part of why we saw a big sort of populist, both on the left and the right, populist backlash. It also was a large part of the Tea Party, right? The sort of DC doesn't understand what's going on. DC they're making each other rich, and they are not paying attention to the issues in the country. It was a large part of every populist wave in American history, this idea that both parties in Washington, DC are trading influence, trading favors for each other. I mean, Andrew Jackson led the first populist movement in many ways in the United States. And one of his rallying cries was that office should not be a species of property. That's kind of what this reminded me of. It's kind of seems like office is a species of property here, and then you can go around and sell that access for a lot of money after you leave office.
And Will, I'm interested to hear from you. He's an Obama alum. Obviously, Obama won Maryland, twice. Probably maintains a pretty high popularity there. Do you think being connected to the Obama administration in the Democratic primary is a strength of his or a weakness? Because he, previously was a member of the federal or someone in the federal government. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Obama's still very popular here. Obviously, there's a progressive side, the progressive side of our party that has issue, and with some of the decisions he did or didn't do or take or positions. but I think he's still broadly popular. Maryland is 30% African American. That's one of the highest non-Southern states with that population. So obviously President Obama remains popular within the African American community. So it's not going to hurt you for sure. But I think Inez brings up a good point. People are frustrated. What COVID exposed and the aftermath is still exposing is that the systems we have and structures we have don't work for normal people. And the system of influence peddling, of lobbying, I know many lobbyists that they're, a lot of friends. I'm sure we all know them. They're good people. It's just the system is broken. It's why we can't get things done. It's why we can't help people. And that's why you see the populist movements. So voters will ask, are you buying into that system? What are you going to do differently? And those are all fair questions, because I think we're at this watershed moment where people know things haven't worked. 40% of Black businesses gone, Black and Latino people dying at higher rates, 10 years younger from COVID, the economy coming back unevenly, housing affordability is at crisis levels here in Maryland, across the country. What are you going to do about it? And how are you going to change the systems that produce these outcomes? That's the question I think voters are going to ask. But certainly President Obama remains popular, but with Obama connections in the race.
Inez, I think you're really right that this is there's a resentment toward how this works on both sides of the political spectrum, and that is part of the populist uprising. That legislators come to Washington, they make the laws, and then they leave Washington, and they help all the individuals, the companies, et cetera, that they help them evade the laws that they just made. And so the better connected people can get away with things. And it is something that is vexing to the citizens. But then we complain about it a lot, but what can actually be done about it? What policies, what should people support if they want to change it?
Here, probably Will and I are going to differ a lot. I actually, you mentioned elected officials. I actually think that's the smallest part of the problem. The fact that people are elected in office and then leave elected office to go work in the private sector. Yes, that is the same kind of influence peddling, but that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. The rest of the iceberg are people in unelected office, in unelected positions of power, like Secretary of Labor, right? There are 2.8 million bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. Many of them do, of course, things that don't have anything to do with setting high-level policy. But many of them do set high-level policy, and they never have to stand in front of the American people and answer for the decisions that they've made. And then those positions, they can parlay into very lucrative careers in the private sector. So I think one of the problems is we have this massive expansion of the administrative state that is completely outside of the control of the voters, right? None of these people, and we saw this completely, and I agree with Will that the pandemic really did reveal how badly the rot has gotten into a lot of our institutions to the American people. But one of those institutions has been that we have had high-ranking bureaucrats making policy that ought to be made by people who then stand in front of voters and answer for the decisions and the judgment calls that they've made, whether you agree with those judgment calls or not. There is a fundamental problem here with this much power and therefore this much influence to sell being wielded by people who never have to answer to voters. That is a broader problem. It's only a piece of the lobbying problem, but I actually think it's an important one that is under-discussed.
Well, speaking of establishment, DNC Chair Jamie Harrison signaled the Democratic establishment's support for Perez, tweeting, "Congratulations, Tom Perez, and best of luck." So it seems like potentially there is going to be some administrative support for Tom Perez from the Democratic Party. I've often referred to Democratic primaries as fights within the family. And, Will, you bring up importantly that we got a progressive wing and we've got a traditional wing. And now the DNC has maybe weighed in with their congratulatory tweet. We'll have to see if they tweet about other candidates. What are your thoughts on the kind of inner family fight that we'll have going on here in this Maryland primary?
Well, look, I will say that tweet was far from an endorsement. But I think you're going to see other people be congratulated. I think you're going to see other folks. It's a great primary. I like primaries. I think that, on the Democratic side, we do have a big tent. It's about ideas. We're at a watershed moment. We're coming off of 8 years of a Republican governor who just ended unemployment insurance early, who had a debacle, flew in test kits from North Korea that wasted away in a warehouse and no one got to use them. And so we need a change here. We have the highest rate of incarceration for Black men 18 to 24 in the nation here in Maryland. So we need some real solutions. And the question is, who's going to bring those innovative solutions? Who has the lived experience? Who has the ability to motivate and the ideas to get it done? That's the debate we're going to have in the Democratic primary. Then we'll all come back together. I talked to a lot of folks, John King and Doug Gansler and others that are running, Peter Franchot. We're all going to come together and support the Democratic nominee at the end of the day next June. But it should be a debate of ideas. And I think primaries are good. In the Republican Party, you got this purging that happens. There's not a lot of room for Liz Cheney's and other types of Republicans. I think that's a good thing about the Democratic Party.
Inez, do you agree with that? I think there's, I think there was perhaps more of a civil war going on the right that is largely very much over and decided in favor of the Trump faction, even if Trump himself, the extent to which he's still involved. Whereas in the Democratic Party, there seems to still be, you saw some of it in the New York City primary, for instance, a small but very vocal and very influential and well-positioned in elite media, a progressive faction, and then a larger, sort of more moderate, more establishment faction. And they seem to still be having a really, notable struggle going on. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we cover the struggle more of the party in power, right? But I think both the Republican and the Democratic parties are really struggling to deal with what is essentially a tectonic shift of the underlying, electorate. And this is not the first time this has happened. Obviously, our parties have evolved. There have been major shifts in the past. There's a reason we have had the Republicans and the Democrats for a very long time, but those Republicans and Democrats have changed radically, right? As I mentioned Andrew Jackson in the last segment, or in the last question, Andrew Jackson headed the Democratic Party, right? The same Democratic Party, but obviously the ideas have changed substantially and the coalitions have changed substantially. But I think both parties are really struggling with this moment. On the Democratic side, I actually see it less. I think the establishment of the Democratic Party is doing a better job of holding on to power than the Republican establishment did. I think, as you say, the battle is largely over in terms of the establishment of the party, but there's still an open question as to who is going to pick up the sort of Trumpism mantle and whether it's going to be more of a Josh Hawley direction or whether it's going to be a fusionism, right, with Reaganism, whether the party is still going to retain some of its more Reaganite elements, especially in places like Texas and Arizona. But I think so far, the Democratic establishment has clung to power better, and they've done that by embracing one part of what their progressive base wants, right? They've embraced the wokeism side, the cultural issues, all of that. They've embraced all the way up. Like you have, of course, Joe Biden, who is definitely no part of the he's not the head of the progressive side of the Democratic Party. Nevertheless, his administration has put out, executive orders on critical race theory, giving grants, for example, to schools. So he has definitely doubled down on a lot of those cultural issues. At the same time, I think a lot of the folks who are economic populists in the Democratic Party, they're finding that their issues have less purchase in the Democratic administration, and that the Democratic administration is sort of technocratic side of the Democratic Party is more dominant on economic issues. So I think it's an interesting battle. It'll be interesting to see where the Democratic Party lands going forward, because actually I think technocratic wokeism is not a particularly popular platform on which to run for the future.
Will, we'll give you the last word, let you respond to that.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. I think, the good thing about the way the progressive movement which I'm a part of, has pushed our party in a big way. Joe Biden has been an economic populist. You might not be as much as you want, but he's talking about raising the corporate tax rate, using that to pay for things, child care tax credit, go down the list. It might not be to the degree that some want, but the things that he's talking about are in line with a lot of progressive values, criminal justice reform, voting rights, our environment. And so, again, it's a matter of degree. I think you see that movement on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, you see a real intransigence, and there's really very few people who are willing to compromise. We'll see what happens if that holds. But I think that'll be similar here in Maryland. And I think you're going to need a candidate who can motivate that progressive base, because that's a strong base here in Maryland. But you're also going to need someone who can work across the aisle, because we have a two-term elected Republican governor. And so I think you're going to need someone that can do both of those things. And I think Wes is best positioned because of his background, but it'll be an interesting primary.
Thanks both of you for joining us. We're so grateful to have you with us.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Next on Rising, Kim Iverson, host of The Kim Iverson Show, joins us to discuss recent SCOTUS decisions when Rising returns.